Hello everyone. My name's Jay. I'm here to talk to you about Firebase. For the last 2 years, I've been working to bring a game from alpha to production using Firebase, and wanted to share some of the lessons along the way for anybody considering the idea. First of all, for those who are wondering, what is a Firebase? Firebase is a platform of backend services first developed for more like mobile applications. Since it's been bought by Google and integrated into Google Cloud Platform, they now have a suite of SDKs which still mostly support mobile, but now they also have a HTTP client, so you can slap it in anything and it will work. These SDKs are still more so based around the mobile stuff, so if you use the Unity SDK, you still need to be like packaging for mobile. Windows is supported in beta only, so if you're going to be building something that you're wanting to run on consoles and stuff, probably use the HTTP client. For HissyFit, the game I was working on, we used the SDK because it's a mobile game. In hindsight, I think HTTP client was the way to go just for future extensibility and for the fact that you have a bit more control over things like serialization and networking. I'm going to go into some of the pain points we had along the process, and for this one, a solution. So the first kind of big issue we ran into was around support for multiple environments and getting that to work with authentication. Out of the box, authentication works great, but we wanted to use Google Play, so it automatically uses login, like you don't have to go through any kind of login steps. But the issue with this is that it requires one single Google Cloud Platform instance to communicate with Google Play, and the common wisdom is to set up multiple Firebase projects which will have their own instances of Google to get working. So the solution was to introduce an auth application. This was a separate project which is just kind of like the first point of contact for your app. So your app can talk to this handy little app which does the authentication. It can then have a remote config which has a list of versions to production environments, and can then can get a custom auth token from the staging environment or the environment that is relevant for that version, pass that back to the user, and the user can then use that to target directly with the environment that it needs to talk to, and from there can just communicate directly to that environment for the rest of the session. This was really handy because it meant that we could then have the users, one version of the game could move through the life cycle of being development, then being into staging while it's in review, and then before we hit the release button, make sure it's before you hit the release button, you can retarget it to production, and that all worked smoothly. Another pain point we came across was serialization. This was with the SDK specifically. The SDK has this really nice kind of like attributes for Firestore data and Firestore property when working with Firestore, which is the NoSQL database that Firebase has. But this serialization doesn't work with the functions, the cloud functions, which you can use your JSON. There's many ways to interact with it. But ended up, we didn't think about this too hard going into the project, and we ended up with this duplication, which was absolutely gross, where you'd have to list everything as Firestore and then JSON separately, and any custom converters would need to be written twice. So this is something that you want to think about early on in the process. Especially this didn't come back to bite us until a little later when we were trying to lock down our database, because Firestore does allow for direct read writes to the database, which works well in an application setting, not so well in a game setting where you've got to worry about hackers and stuff. Some quick points to just keep an eye on. First of all, with cloud functions, you want to make sure from the start of your project you're making sure that they're in nice groups, because you'll want to deploy these functions, and you can deploy one, you can deploy a few in a group, or you can deploy all. And if you always default to deploying all, and then you eventually have 40 functions, that deploy all doesn't work so well, so make sure you're grouping them as you go. Cloud functions also have a cold start to them, so if nobody's used your app in a bit, then it will take a few seconds to start running, which can be a pain. There's things that you can do to mitigate this, but they are quite foundational, so you want to look into that before you're building your production environment. And on the Firestore side, It's a NoSQL database, which if you're coming from an SQL background, you have to do some unlearning. Denormalize your data. That sounds real funky. Another one is to make sure you review your security rules before you go live. As said, you can, by default, write to your database as a client, which is openings for all kinds of nonsense. Don't trust your users. Don't. And lastly, backups can be automated via the Google Cloud Platform, which is really handy. Overall, I'd recommend Firebase. It's pretty cool. It has a great free tier, which is fantastic for prototyping. And then on top of that, it's quite reasonable, the pricing on it, for what features it gives you. Just keep in mind some of those facts when you're going through your development cycle. Thanks.